Yeah, good morning. So we are doing today the last two dafim in Brachos, Samach Gimel Beis. We're up to through Samach Daled and Aleph. We are at the two daf on Samach Gimel Beis in the narrow lines. Taner Rabbanan. Yeshenichos Rabbi Sinal Keren B'Yavna. When the rabbis came to Keren B'Yavna, remember the Gemara in Gittin Gimel. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai asks Rome. He knows that they're going to destroy the Beis Hamikdash, or maybe he made a mistake in not asking to save the Beis Hamikdash. Meshach Chacham Achar, but whatever it was, he asked to save Yavna v'Chachamel. The rabbis were already in Yavna. The rabbis traveled. The Sanhedrin was Gola. It was in Golos from various different places. One of the places was Yavna. Where Yavna is, not exactly clear. Some of Farshim thought it was in the north. It seems pretty clearly for sure not. Yavna is not too far away from Yerushalayim, and archaeologists say that the area that we call Kerem Yavna today, that is a historical area. Regardless, so the rabbis, the Sanhedrin, are sitting there in Yavna, and you can imagine, in order for the Sanhedrin to go to a place where it's not their natural place, not their natural habitat, they're obviously being hosted by the locals. The locals are keeping them, well fed, giving them lodging, etc. So Zok the Gemara. These various personages were there that day. Why there? Why them? Why not Rabbi Gamliel? Why not others who were there in Yavna? I'm not sure. But whatever it may be, then it's a bit of an interesting grouping, right? If it's the same Rabbi Huda, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Nechem, and maybe Rabbi Meir, that are the Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is not here. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is hiding from the Romans. It's not clear. Rabbi Elazar ben Rabbi Yossi Aglili is also an interesting addition. We don't normally see him as one of the five sons of Rabbi Akiva from the second group. Again, not 100% clear what the grouping is. So the Gemara continues, Piscal Kulam before Achsanya V'darshu. Everyone opened up to talk about the code of the Achsanya. You may have been to events where the speaker gets up and says, I want to be Haisech B'Koid Achsanya. What do they always mean? They want to talk about the host, the person who's making the event, thank them for having them, thank them for making such a nice event, etc. So Pasal Kulam B'Koid Achsanya V'darshu. Everyone opens up B'Koid Achsanya and they make a speech. I'm not 100% sure I understand what this line means. I'll explain to you before we go any further. Just look at the Gemara. You'll see that the next words of the Gemara are and then Rabbi Yehuda gives another speech. If you look at the two dots in the wide line, you'll see and then if you keep on going down the two dots towards the end of the page, the last 10 lines, you'll see and the next two dots, then the next two dots, so it sounds like from the Gemara, if you would just read it without knowing anything else, that the there were four rabbis, three of them were opening speeches about Bechved Achsanya, and one of them, Rabbi Yehuda, doesn't speak about Bechved Achsanya, he's talking about Bechved Torah. That would seem to be the simple understanding. The Maharsha doesn't like that. The Maharsha wants to try to push in that even Rabbi Yehuda is being Paisiach Bechved Achsanya, although I don't see that necessarily from the substance of what Rabbi Yehuda says, but he tries. But I also was wondering if one could potentially understand this Gemara as follows. The Gemara says, that is to say, everyone got up to give a drasha, and the drasha initially that everyone gave was Bechved Achsanya. That is to say, look at the Gemara. Everyone gave a drasha Bechved Achsanya. Then we say, Rabbi Yehuda seems to have given more speeches than everybody else. He gave one speech Bechved Torah and then another speech Bechved Torah. So it could be he gave another speech Bechved Achsanya, and that one we just didn't record. Whereas the other ones, they didn't give any other speeches. They only gave one speech Bechved Achsanya, which we recorded like that. But we don't record Rabbi Yehuda's speech Bechved Achsanya. That's my natia to sort of try to understand this Gemara, because I don't think that the way the Maharsha tries to push in Bechved Achsanya to Rabbi Yehuda's speech is necessarily so obvious. Okay. Why is Rabbi Yehuda called Rosh Hashanah B'chol Magim? This is from the Gemara Shabbos Lamed Gimel. It's a famous Gemara. Everybody knows. Three rabbis sitting there: Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yossi, and Rabbi Shimon Yochai, talking about the Romans. Are they good? Are they bad? The Gemara Avodah Zarah on Gimel. And what would you imagine? Rabbi Shimon Yochai kept to the way his Rabbi Akiva and said that the Romans are terrible. Rabbi Yossi said nothing, and Rabbi Akiva. And Rabbi Yehuda said that the Romans are wonderful, which is against his Rebbe's Mahalach, against Rabbi Akiva. We just had the Gemara Samachalach, Rabbi Akiva passes away, he's killed by the Romans. So how Rabbi Yehuda changes his approach is a good question, and not one for now. But for our purposes now, as a result, the Romans go after Rabbi Shimon Yochai, they hound him in the cave for 12 years. Rabbi Yossi was silent, he has to run away. Sort of sounds like Eiv, right? The Maisa there by Parai. You have the three advisors, Eiv, right? Who's the other ones? Bilam and Yisro, right? So what happened? Yisro spoke in favor of the Jews, he had to run away. Bilam spoke against the Jews, he was honored. And Eiv was silent, so he gets all the punishment that we know in Eiv. Fine. So the similar kind of a thing over here, that Rabbi Yehuda is Pesach B'chvei Torah. He's the Rosh Hashanah B'chol Magim, because the Romans liked what he said in favor of the Romans, and therefore they make him the honored speaker. So they're actually keeping to the law, as Rashi notes, as some of the Mefarshim point out, he's the Rosh Hashanah because of the fact that that becomes the literal law, as they're, I guess, have no choice but to follow what the Romans are dictating to them. Okay, continues the Gemara. So what was his drasha? He darshans the pasuk after the egel, right? After the egel, so it was terrible thing. The pasuk says, Moshe took his tent, and he put it away outside the machna. And the pasuk continues, anybody who wanted to seek Hashem, anyone who wanted to be a seeker of God, can go out of the machna and go find out what the word of Hashem is. But as a punishment, as a way of showing how horrible the actions of the ego were, so we punish. Moshe Rabbeinu punished the Jews by leaving them, by going into sort of a golus away from them. So the Gemara continues. Aren't this is essentially a kavachemer? The Aron. Again, how do we get to talk about Aron when we just talked about the oil of Moshe? It doesn't mention anything about the Aron. I'm not 100% clear, but for our purposes now, maybe there were two Aronis, as some want to point out, but it's almost beside the point. The point is that Moshe Rabbeinu, who is the Neisan HaTorah, he's the one who's giving over the Torah to the Jewish people. He is in exile. He has moved himself away from the Jewish people. He's outside the Machane. So by definition, the Torah is outside now the Machane. And as a result of the ego, so now, and nevertheless, the pasuk says, Amr Torah. And the Torah says, whoever wants to go see God, whoever wants to go hear what the word of Hashem is, you have to go outside now the Machane to go talk to Moshe. How far of a distance was it? Not so far. Whatever. It was not a huge distance. So Talmidei Chachamim sheholchem me'ir la'ir me'medina l'medina l'may Torah. So Talmidei Chacham, meaning like us, right? Like all the students that were in the Kerem B'Yavne, right? I think we may have said this over on Sunday, right? That why is it called a Kerem? It's not called a Kerem because there was a vineyard in Yavne. Maybe there were vineyards in Yavne, but it's called Kerem B'Yavne because the rabbi sat shura is like a Kerem. Like a Kerem had the vineyards, has the lines of the vines. If you don't plant them on top of each other, you won't be able to pick them nicely. So you plant the vines all separately, beautifully. So to the rows and the rows of the rabbis. So Talmidei Chacham sheholchem me'ir la'ir medina l'medina l'may Torah. Allah is kam v'kam. You have to understand the sacrifice. These are people living, they live hand to mouth, right? They're farmers, they have families, and they're all coming together to study Torah in a specific area. They're coming to learn together, to hear shiurim together. So what kind of a sacrifice is that? Right? If you call somebody who goes michutz l'machane to Moshe Rabbeinu, which is okay, shnei masar mil, it's not nothing, but it's nothing special. You go home that night and you call that person Mavakesh Hashem. He's a seeker of God. Then it says, us. we who are traveling here to Yavne from all over the land of Israel, or even larger, from the diaspora, wherever they came from, to all be together to study. Allah's kama that we are Mavakshi Hashem, that we are really seekers of God. That's what I'm saying. Is it really a covet achsanya? It's a covet of themselves. So the Marsha wants to say, no, the covet of the achsanya, because the only way they can be successful in their learning is if they have a good lodging, if they have the esenteg, if they have some food at home at their at their the ma'arech, if they're giving them a nice lodging and a nice food and a shower, then they can come and learn like a mensch. But if not, they won't be able to. So that's the covenant assignment. Okay, fine. Here's the Gemara. So we talking a little bit more about the ego. So v'dibra Hashem al Moshe panim al panim. Right. The pasuk says Hashem spoke to Moshe Rabbeinu. No one else in history was Hashem ever speaking to somebody like that face to face. V'dibra Hashem al Moshe panim al panim. Kashi daber ish al v'yehu. As a person speaks to the friend, no one else, no other Navi ever reached that kind of a level to be able to talk to the Rebbeinu Shalom like that. So the Rebbeinu Shalom said to Moshe Rabbeinu, Moshe, aniva ata nazbir panim ha'alachim. He says, you and I, we should show a nice face in halacha. What does that mean? That, as we'll see, that essentially Moshe Rabbeinu, by leaving, is showing a very sour face, right? He's showing a very upset face. By putting his tent outside the Machane, he's essentially saying to the Jewish people, God is not happy with you, I'm not happy with you. And so this is not necessarily the most ideal. The more explains, what do we mean by this? So continues the Gemara, Ikeda Amri, another way of saying it is as follows. Hashem said to Moshe Rabbeinu as follows. Just like I have been nice to you. I have shown you a nice face, meaning I've taught you all this Torah. So too you should be nice. Show a nice face to the Jewish people. Teach them Torah. The hechzer oilam kamer. Return your oil back to the place where it belongs. Don't be in exile here because you're angry at what they did. Ever the pasuk says, Moshe Rabbeinu returned back to the encampment, to the Machane Yisrael, and he no longer stayed outside away from them. So the Gemara continues explaining this. Amar Bavo, Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu Moshe, Akshav Yom Harav B'Kas V'Tam B'Kas Yisrael Atei Aleim. What's going to happen if you stay outside the Machane? If you don't go and return, then what are the Bnei Yisrael going to say? The Rav, meaning HaKadosh Baruch Hu, was angry. He's angry at the Jews. Why? Because of the fact that they have sinned. They've done the ego. And the Talmud, Moshe Rabbeinu, he's also angry. He's moved his tent outside the encampment. So what's going to be with the Jews then? God is angry with them. Moshe is angry with them. Who's going to help them? Who's going to protect them? Who's going to teach them? Who's going to guide them? Therefore, Hashem says to Moshe Rabbeinu, if you're going to return your oil back, then if you're going to return the oil back and you're going to go back to the encampment, then the Seder Gomer, it's okay. And then everything will be all right. Even though if I'm angry at them, at least you will be with them. And if not, then Yeshua Benun, because the pasuk continues says in the Shari, Yeshua Benun now lo yamish mitoch oil. Right? Yeshua Benun never left. He never left Moshe Rabbeinu's oil. Moshe Rabbeinu moved the oil outside the Machane. Yeshua went with him. What's the joke? What's the I mean it. Alfei Abdallas. What's lahavdil, the thing? Wherever Mary went, her sheep went with her or something like this. Right? Moshe Rabbeinu is like, can I leave? Yeshua will not leave him. Wherever Moshe Rabbeinu goes, Yeshua goes with him. So Yeshua is also Michutz Loyal. Moshe Rabbeinu is on Mount Sinai. Yeshua is waiting. Yeshua is always there. So over here, this is an implied threat. Right? Hashem saying to Moshe Rabbeinu, listen, yeah, ego's a bad deal, sure. But if you don't forgive them, if you don't go back, then Yeshua is going to take over. Right? Hashem says it's an unbelievable pedagogical lesson. Hashem says, I have to be angry, I have to show anger to them, fine. But you can't. You're the leader, you have to be leading. You cannot hold and try to show them your anger. That's not appropriate. So he sends Moshe Rabbeinu back, and there's an implied threat, says the Ravo. If you don't, Yeshua is going to take over. And that's what it means the Moshe Rabbeinu returned back to the camp. Nevertheless, it didn't go to waste. Hashem said that Yeshua is going to be the leader. It didn't go to waste. Yeshua, his helper, never left the oil. Again, trying to bring all the brachas together. You remember, brachas on Zion of an Aleph. We've been going back to Zion of an Aleph a few times. So what did the Gemara there say? The Gemara said there that, and it's also Gemara. It's the reverse Gemara is in Makkas on Yud, right? The Gemara in Makkas, a famous Gemara, says "Kilas Chacham Afilat Tanaiba." Right? When a Chacham says something, that's a bad thing, right? But he says it al Tanai, it still comes true. What's the example? No, the example is Parsh Vayetze by Brachot, right? Yaakov Avinu says, whoever takes the trafim is going to die, right? But the Gemara in here in Brachas says the what he calls says the reverse, says the Gemara in Zion says that if you the bracha of a branch mafila tanahi ba, even if it's on a tanai, it's still going to come about. What was the source over there? Right, the diva shiatzim shekadosh baruch hu afila tanahi ba. The source was in relation to Moshe Rabbeinu. I think it was Moshe Rabbeinu, right? Because the Gemara said what? The Gemara said that by Moshe Rabbeinu that he ended up with his was his grandchildren, right? The pasuk says that Hashem says to Moshe Rabbeinu that I'm going to make you into the new leader, and we're going to get rid of all the Jews, and we'll restart the nation with you. And Moshe Rabbeinu says, no, thank you. I don't want you to start it with me. I want to keep it exactly the way it was. And so the pasuk says that in the end, Moshe Rabbeinu ends up with all of these children. The Gemara in the end of Zion, the Gemara says, Harif Imanu Ashmine Ve'esa Oiskol the Goy Atzum Afagav the Boy Moshe Rachme. Even though Moshe Rabbeinu davened that Hashem shouldn't destroy the Jewish people, and it was batal. I feel hachi ukman bezarish. Remember, Bnei Moshe Gershom Eliezer. You Bnei Eliezer v'chavi harosh. Bnei v'chavi rob l'mala. Meaning they had Shishim Riboy. Moshe ended up becoming a great nation just himself, even though he declined the opportunity. He had many descendants. His children had many descendants. Okay. The next drasha from Rabbi Yehuda. So the Gemara says, "V'oid pasach Rabbi Yehuda b'chved HaTorah." Another drasha from Yehuda there in Camp Yavna that he did it b'chved HaTorah. B'darash, and he starts dashing the pasuk of Haskes Ushma Yisrael. Now, we actually had this also, right? This is not on Zion. This was where? This was. The Gemara told us this. We also had this. Yeah, we also had this Gemara. The Gemara actually it's on Tes Vavam Beis. Right? The Gemara told us on Tes Vavam Beis. Remember, it was a question of when you say Shema, are you able to say B'chol Lashon? Right? And we said, what about other mitzvahs? What about Birkas on Muslim? What about other things? So the Gemara says Haskes Shema Yisrael. What was Haskes? The Gemara said that you have to do all the other mitzvahs. You have to do it in the right language in Lashon Kodesh. Gemara says, really? Lo yivarach Adam Birkas HaMazon b'libo, even Berach Yatzel, Iyimar Haki Yimar. Marves B'chayis B'Krishma, the Shema Yisrael, B'shar Mitzvahs, Divrei Hakol Yatzel, V'aksiv, Haskes Shema Yisrael. Says Mar Ahu B'Divrei Torah Ksiv. Haskes is not teaching about other mitzvahs, right? Because maybe you say Shema Yisrael should also be B'chol Lashon, like you say by Shema. No. Haskes is only talking about the Divrei Torah. That was the Gemara Tosaf Tezvav. And here we have the Gemara. The Gemara here is the second drasha now from Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says, what does it mean? Haskes Shema Yisrael. Hayem Azeni Yesilam. This is the end of Dvarim. Moshe Rabbeinu is telling the Jewish people, you became a nation today. What do you mean you became a nation? They become a nation this day. It's the end of 40 years. The people who love Torah, every single day for them, it's like the day that it came down from Sinai. That is to say, Haskes Shema Yisrael, Hayom Hazeni Yisrael means that if you really are desirous of studying Torah, then really each and every day is like the day that it has been given down from Har Sinai. Fine. So another drasha that you see Rabbi Yehuda is doing a b'chved HaTorah. It doesn't imagine having anything to do with the Astanya. Okay. Rav Tanchum b'rei de Rav Chia ish kvar akay. So Rav Tanchum, the son of Rav Chia, but not the Rav Chia Rabbah, this is another Rav Chia from Akko, right, from the northern part of Israel, said as follows: Teda, You should know, Shari Adam, Kari Kriyash Shema Shachas Harvest. The person says the Shema every day, in the morning, in the evening. Ve'erev echad einai kaira, and one day, he doesn't say Shema. Doime kimi shaloi kari Kriyash Shema. It's like somebody who never said Shema in his life. What do you mean? It's a pretty harsh statement. If you got it for one night, the idea being, Haskes Ushma Yisrael, that you have to pay attention, say Shema, and if you don't on one day, then it's like we had that in the Gemara, right? The Gemara told us also, right? That was the Gemara in the beginning of the Gemara in the beginning of the fourth parak told us, Muvas lo yuchal liskain. Right, what's the situation? If somebody who's crooked, he cannot be put back together straight. Zet shabito kriyash mashal arvis for kriyash mashal shachris. Somebody who's mevat kriyash mashal shachris and arvis, or tefillah of arvis or shachris. And so the Gemara says that's a situation of shabita b'mezid. If somebody was mevat b'mezid, you call him muvas lo yuchal liskain. But if somebody did it by mistake, obviously, you're not going to call it such a degree. And at least when it comes to tefillah, we allow there to be tashlumin. However, there isn't tashlumin for Shema. There's only tashlumin for Shema Nasrei. And so that's why the Gemara here is probably saying that somebody who forgot to say Shema on one morning or one evening, that he is like he never said it in his life, meaning he doesn't have the opportunity to make it up. I think that's why he's saying, but it is a pretty harsh lashon, which not 100% clear what the need is to be so harsh about it. We're not saying that somebody did it deliberately. We're saying one day he didn't do it. He forgot. He was busy. We're not saying did it b'mezid. So why are we saying such so harsh? I'm not sure. Okay. Continues the Gemara more vidrashis on Haskes. Haskes, what does it mean? Haskes? Also kitais for asku b'Torah. Right? We're playing on the word Haskes, that you should make classes to study Torah. What do you mean? Make classes to study Torah? Because Torah is not going to be studied unless it's done with others. If you study on your own, you never really get to become a real God of the Torah. Of course, there are exceptions, but generally speaking, the pilpul kaverim, the back and forth, right? Right, the idea that you learn the most from when you're challenged, when you have people asking you questions, people learning on their own. They never really have somebody who's standing, and challenge them and saying you're not right. Your reading of this is not correct. So therefore, we're darshaning haskes to say you should have kitos, you should have chaburas to learn. What does it mean in pasuk when the pasuk says that you have a sword? You have cher alabad b'nei alu, and we were fools. What does it mean? What is this pasuk trying to teach you? Not as a matter of pshat, but as a drash. Cherev al seinim shal talmidei chachamim. We're talking about a cherev, a sword, on the enemies of the talmidei chacham, meaning a sword on the talmidei chacham themselves. We're saying it, Saginar, that they sit sort of separately, not in groups, not in with chavrusas, but so people who sit alone and to try to study and become experts in Torah, that's not ideal. It's not ideal. It's ideal to always have chavrusas, chaburas, and things like that, where Torah is learned in public with others. That's the best way to be able to learn. So again, another drush on Haskes, and the idea of kitos, of studying together in group study. And not only that, not just that you don't become a great Talmud Chacham, but you also become like a tippish. Right? Here in the pasuk said, which we're dashing to talk about the Chachamim, it talks about being fools. But this is by the chait. That's not wrong. That's too strong. By Miriam speaking inappropriately towards Moshe Rabbeinu, Elisha Kushas Hashalokah, Ki Isha Kushas Lokah. So what is the punishment for Miriam? She got Tzeras. So Aaron davens, or I shouldn't say davens. He asks Moshe to daven on her behalf. Moshe Rabbeinu davens, right, the shortest tefillah. We're also having more brachos about it. We learn that from you don't have to mention the name in the tefillah, right? Kel Narafan Allah. Don't mention the name, even it's enough. So we say over there, Aaron says to Moshe, Asher na'amlu v'asher chatanu, right? That we were fools, that we sinned. Right? It's not me saying that Miriam sinned. It's Aaron saying it. Right? We sinned in what we said. So, so the Gemara is saying that we compared it like in sort of like a Gzer Shava, Asher Alnu to V'nei Alu. Right? So we were fools. You become a fool if you study Torah on your own. It's not just that you become, now we said, it's not just you're not going to be a Talmud Chacham, you're going to be a tippish. Not just you're going to be a tippish, you're going to be like a chayta, you're going to be like a sinner. Shneemar v'asher chatanu, because look what Aaron said. Asher ne'alnu v'asher chatanu. So if you study on your own, you're even like a sinner. Right? Another potential way to show that we were sinners is the or fools. In this case, it seems like fools. Yeah, Hashem Alnu was the source that we're going on. Another way to show that you're going to be a fool if you study on your own is Mehachane Alu Sari Tzayan. Right, the ministers, the Sarim of Tzayan, they became fools. I'm not sure exactly how that can connect to us, but okay. So again, the short of it is that we're learning out from Haskes that studying with Chabura is ideal. Studying with Chaburas, that's the ideal. Studying on your own is not the ideal. Of course, Chazar, one thing, but to learn always with yourself and not have any Pupul Chaverim, a person is going to be not reaching a level of Bikram Chacham. It will be potentially tippish, potentially even a Saita. Okay. Says the Gemara, another drush on Haskes. Davar Acher. Another approach on what Haskes means. Haskes is Shema Yisrael. Kitzu atzvachem al divrei Torah. Break yourselves down for the benefit of the Torah. Break yourself down. Like Tutzin Mitzvah Shira, like break yourself down. What do we mean, break yourself down? Damar Shlakish. Damar Shlakish B'nayin She'en divrei Torah Miskayim and El B'mishem Emes Atzmei Olev. It's a very famous Gemara. That a person is not going to what um, become have therapy a kiyum in himself unless he kills himself over it. You have to kill yourself to become a Talmud Chacham. The only people who are true Talmud Chacham are people who mamish kill themselves. As I remember once was bringing my kids to Shira Rabbi Berkowitz, who I studied by in Israel. Rabbi Yitzchak Berkowitz is now in Isha Torah also. Then he was in his interregnum period where he wasn't in Aish, he was just studying in his Kotel. So I brought my kids to see him, and he said to them, "You only become Gedalim during Ben Hasdarim. That's the only time you become a Ben Hasdarim and Ben Hasmanim. The rest of the time, no." Well, what do you mean? He meant during the regular Zman, during the regular Sdarim, everybody's learning. But you want to know what it means to become a Gadol B'Torah. You want to know what it means to truly become a serious Talmud Chacham. It's only Ben Hasdarim. When nobody's required to learn. Many people are taking a nap. They're relaxing. They're going back to their deers, whatever it is that they do. Ben Azmanim, they're taking trips and the like. That's what separates the true Talmid Chachamim from the people who are sort of, the intellectual dilettante. Okay, finish the Gemara. So how did Reish Lakish know this? Right, the pasuk by Chukas, that the literal translation of it has nothing to do with this, right? It's talking about the Torah of Tumas Meis. Zeis HaTorah Adam Kiyamas Ba'el. But Rabbi Shlokish is darshaning it. Zeis HaTorah, this is essence that what the Torah is only Adam Kiyamas, but only the person going to kill himself. Over it, that's the only way you're going to become a real Talmud Chacham. Davar Achar, another pshat in Haskes. Haskes is Shema Yisrael, half. So we're dashing this word has, right, to be silent. Right? So what does that mean? You should be silent, and then you should be fragging up, then you should be pushing. Kid the Rava. It's like what Rava explained. The Amar Rava. First, the person should study Torah, and then he should be harving in Torah. What it means? It means don't be like, throwing out your big questions and all of that until you first get the basics. Get the basics. All right, first have a superficial understanding, and then you get a deeper understanding. But if you think you're going to go straight in from 0 to 100, then you're not going to get it. From like the juice of milk comes the cream, and the juice of the nose comes yetzi dam, blood, and from the juice of anger comes fighting. What do we mean? From where do you see the cream of Torah? From somebody who spits out his mother's milk. What does it mean? The way I have always thought about it, which is based upon the more insight to your base, the more over there tells us, based upon a pasuk in Yeshaya, right? Mi Yerideh, Mi Yav and Shemua, Gemule Mechalav, right? Atikim Meshadai, Gemule Mechalav, people who are no longer nursing. That's when you meaning it's a way of saying grow up, right? When you grow up and you're no longer in nursing stage, that's when you can become a serious Talmud Chacham. Continues the Gemara. So the Gemara goes off on these. We said that the juice from the nose comes blood. Kol Talmud Chacham, Kol Talmud, I'm sorry, Shekayas Allah, Rabbi. So we have, just to mention quickly, right? You have a Talmud, you have a Talmud Chacham, and you have a Chacham, right? Talmud Chacham is what we refer to Chacham today, but it's actually not the highest level, right? A Chacham is the highest level. Talmud Chacham will be a lower level. He's the Talmud of a Chacham, and the Talmud will be obviously even the lowest. So we said, called Talmud Shekayas Allah, Rabbi, right? Any junior student whose Rebbe gets angry at him, Parmishanim V'Shoisek, and he keeps his mouth quiet, the Rebbe is angry at him, he's yelling at him, and he keeps quiet. Eventually, he will have the ability to tell the difference between dam tameh and dam tar. Riv was the reference here that the juice from anger is fights. So any Talmud whose rabbi gets angry at him once, twice, and he's quiet, he'll eventually be able to tell the difference between din and mamnas and din and nefashis. Somebody wants to become a serious Talmud Chacham, he's going to have to deal with Chesed Mishpat issues. There's no part of Torah that is more complex and more unbelievable than the area of monetary law, because that's like a never-ending spring of water. Again, we've had many times now in Parak Haraya, where Shimon Nachmani is not saying things in the name of Rabbi Yonasan, but most of Shasi is. So Shimon Nachmani, what does this pasuk mean? Anybody who's menabel himself, meaning he makes himself nivel, he makes himself like a nothing. He puts himself down in order to be able to get Torah. Sefer lisnase. He's going to eventually become great in Torah. But if he's sort of keeping shut, he doesn't want to be embarrassed and humiliating himself and asking flutz questions, and he wants to have a certain position and a certain persona. So he's thinking about his persona and therefore is preventing himself from asking. Yad lepeh, right? So we're dashing on the play on the pasuk. He's going to eventually put his hand to his mouth. In other words, when people come to ask him shilas, he's going to have no idea what to answer because of the fact that he was too worried about his placement in the class, and rather than actually trying to get to know the knowledge. So now we finally get a chance to see the other drushes that were done b'chvar Nechsanya. These are a little bit easier. Pasuk from Nechemia b'chvar Nechsanya, v'darash from Nechemia darshan. What is it? The drush that he said in the honor of the host. V'darash ma'id nechsiv v'yom mishal hakeni l'chus tu redu mitech hamaleki. What did it mean when Shaul said to the Keni, when he's going out to fight by Amalek, he said to the Keni, or we are presuming descendants of Yisrael, he said to them, listen, leave the Amalek, they're always next to Amalek. I may have once pointed that out. If you look in the end of Parashas Balak, you'll see over there, Amalek, Vayisa Mishalei Vayomer, he's talking about Amalek, he's talking about the Keni right next to each other. They seem to always be going together. So he says to them, you have to leave the Amalek because we're going to be going fighting now them. And if you stay there, you're going to get killed with them. You guys, the Canaan, descendants of Israel, you guys the chesed with the Jewish people. Is not a massive chavachomer. My Yisrael was just covered, mechabed Moshe. He was bringing Moshe close just to mechabed himself. So to somebody who's in his house, and he feeds him and he gives him to eat, etc., that such a person, is going to be, considered a great host. Yisro only did it for his own benefit, so therefore, you hosts of Kerem B'Yavne are taking us in, for sure, are not doing it for your own cover, you're doing it for everybody else, and therefore you're that much greater. Now, number one, this is very nice that we had the Gemara before on Chesed. Remember, Ben Zayma said, when you have somebody who's a good person, right, he's amazing about the host. So here he's talking nicely about the host. I did wonder, and I will say it as a bit of a joke, the Gemara tells in Bamitzia and Chaf Gimel that you're not supposed, the Chacham, Tamid Chacham, Rashan bin Milahu, B'shlosh devarim b'shpaiza, b'puri b'shpaiza. Masechta b'puri b'shpaiza. So they lie about three things. One of them is the shpaiza, that their hosts aren't so good, because you don't want to have more of them, coming and bothering the hosts. So you're not supposed to say how great the hosts are. So how could it be Paiseh b'chvar achsanya? I think the answer to this question is, if you look in there's another version of this, which is in the Medrash. Maybe they were only talking about with the Aksanya there. In other words, they weren't talking about publicly to other people. They were just talking about the Aksanya there. Okay, could be. There's a very problematic Rashi, which we just have to mention. Rashi says, what's it mean that Yisroi was Mekarev Moshe just for covet Atzmai? What is he talking about? What does it mean? When was Yisroi being Mekarev Moshe for his own covet? So we'll look at what Rashi says. Rashi says, She'echilam, that they fed him. Right? Should never Yahweh Aaron v'chol Yisrael lechem lechem v'chesem Moshe l'fnei Elokim. It's not my cash. I mean, Rashi on his face, it doesn't make any sense. When Yisra came to visit Moshe Rabbeinu, so they gave him a whole meal, and everybody came to join. That was Yisra being Mekarev Moshe for covered Atzmai. That's Moshe Rabbeinu being Mechabed Yisra. What are you talking about? So I partially don't understand. The Maharsha says this is just wrong. It doesn't. The Maharsha says that it can't work like this. So what is the chesed that they did with the Canis? Forefathers, what was the major chesed that they did with the Jewish people? The major chesed was that they saved Moshe Rabbeinu, that Yisro brought Moshe Rabbeinu in. He told his daughters, Kiran Lechem. So by saving the Jewish people, that's the big chesed. I think that when the Gemara is saying now he was Mekarev Moshe just for covered Atzma, it's because when Moshe Rabbeinu walked in, he understood this is a sui generis human being. There's no one like them on the face of this planet. This is for my daughters. That's for covered Atzma. He wants to make sure that he's not letting this person leave his house without marrying one of his daughters. That's covered atzmai. That's, I think, it's Pashup Shot. Okay, continues the Gemara. So the Gemara says, what was his drasha v'darsh? You have to be nice to that domi, to the mitzri, right? Because we were gerim in the land of the mitzrim, and the daimon because they're our family. Why did the mitzrim bring the Jews in by the time of Yosef? They let in the whole family of Yaakov Avinu, all of Yosef's brothers and their kids. Because Pari says, if you have any good generals, any good people in the army, bring them to me. So that's why he let them in, because he thought they were going to be an asset to his country. So you are bringing in all of this archim to your homes. You are even greater than that because you're doing it without any recompense. What was his drasha? So Ovid Edom, right, the Eitam Agiti that the Aaron stayed in his house. So what did the Aaron do? What did the Aaron need? Do you have to feed the Aaron? No. Maybe you swept up a little bit by the Aaron. That's it. So basically, you guys are so much greater. You're doing so much for us over all these months that we've been studying here. So Mahi, the one wants to know what was the amazing benefits that Ovid Edom had as a result of hosting the Aaron. Mahi bracha shebaruchu. What was the bracha that he got? I'm Rabbi Bar Zvida Zu Chamais. This was his wife. Her name was Chamais. Veches Kaliseh, and her 8 daughters-in-law, because he had 8 sons and he had 8 daughters-in-law. Sheyoldu Shisha Bekeres Echad. That he had 6. They each had 6 children. If you look in the Rekiv Eger, he quotes a Tzeitel Adarach that the woman has 7 compartments with which she can become pregnant, and Shisha Bekeres Echad means that 3 on one side, 3 on the other side. That could be for boys and girls. How that fits with the Gemara and Nidal Laman Aleph, not 100% clear. Which says other reasons of how you get male and female children. And there's one compartment in the middle which gives you tumtums and a drug, and so you don't want that one. So that's how you get shisha, which is not the 7th one, because that one's bad one. The Gemara continues. We're now in Samach Daled on Aleph. The Gemara says shisha v'keres echad shenemar pa'alti hashmini. The 8th one of Siv Kibercha Lekin Kol Ela Mibnei Ovid Edom Hemo Bnei Bachem Ish Chayil B'Kerach La'Avodah Shisha Mishnayim L'Ovid Edom. So all of this a long pasuk and there in Divrei Yamim, and the short of it is that he ends up with 62 children. 62. How did he get to 60? 62 is the 8 ones that he started out with, and then they each had shisha b'keres echad. That's how you get to 62. You can work out the math separately. So now we have a couple of quick drashas that bring out this point that if somebody is doichek the shah, Amar of Avin Halevi called Dechik as a Shah Dechik. Somebody who's Dechik the Shah, the Shah is going to be Dechik him. If he meaning, says Rashi, it's the story of Absalom, he tried to become the king and he got pushed away. But anybody who waits for the hour and doesn't push it and doesn't force the hour, then then he will be able to find and eventually get to a place where he will realize it. What is the source of this? It means the Rabbi of Rabbi Yosef. The source is Rabbi and Rabbi Yosef. That what happened with Rabbi and Rabbi Yosef, the Gemara in the end of Harish Yudal, Rabbi Yosef, seen of Rabbi Eiker Harm. Rabbi Yosef was a Sinai, meaning he knew tons of information, and Rabbi was Eiker Harm, he was very deep. Rabbi, the Gemara Rosh Hashanah tells us we only lived till he was the age of 40. Some of them in Eli, we had maybe talked about different gears with Rabbi Rava. It's for sure Rabbi, he was a Kohen, Rabbi Nachman, and the Gemara in Bamitzia Pei about how he died, the whole situation of Masir over there. So the Gemara says as follows: they needed a new Rosh Hashiva. They sent a letter to the land of Israel. Who should become the Rosh Hashiva? They sent back to them Sinai Kaidim. The Sinai should become the Rosh Hashiva because everyone needs the person who has all the brises and the missions. Everyone knows everything. They didn't have Google in those days. Whether or not that would change things nowadays is a different question. Rabbi Yosef refused to become Rosh Hashiva because the astrologers told him, the Chaldean astrologers, there's a good way to end Haraya. That Malchus Tartan Shinin, you're going to only lead be Rosh Hashiva for 2 years. So Malach Rabbi Essen Tartan Shinin. So Rabbi took the job, and he was a Rosh Hashiva for 22 years. And during those 22 years, he died at 40. That means he became Rosh Hashiva at 18. Malach Rabbi Yosef Tartan Shnin Upaga. Rabbi Yosef was the Rosh Hashiva for 2.5 years. He never took any sarara. If he had to go to the doctor, he went to the doctor himself. He never called anybody to his house. He never wanted to act like a Rosh Hashiva. We say this that every day in the davening. What do we mean? Why are we bringing in the Lekei Yaakov? Why don't we say Lekei Avram, Lekei Yitzchak? When you bring in a bream, you bring it in the thickest. In other words, who's the one who's going to daven most of the Jewish people? Yaakov Avinu, because he had the most tzar gidul banim. He's the one who had to worry most about building the Bnei Yisrael. Anybody who has a hana from the Suda of Talmud Chacham, where the Talmud Chacham is there, Kilun enemies of Eshchina, Shenever Yaveh Aram, Chozin Yisrael Lechem Lechem, Im Chasem Mashav, Nelekim. By that meal, when Yisrael came along, they ate Lefnei Hashem, Bechil Lefnei Hashem Aklu, Ba'aloi Lefnei Moshe Aklu, Eloim Lechal Kol Nenem, Suda of Talmud Chacham, Shari B'Soicha, Kilun enemies of Eshchina. Anybody who eats a meal when the Talmud Chacham is there is as though they are being nana from the Ziv Eshchina. The last thing from Amar Rabbi Yavin Halevi, and if the Mechaver Al Yemer Lech B'Shalom, you shouldn't say to somebody when you're leaving them Lech B'Shalom, El Lech L'Shalom. Why? When Yisrael said to Moshe, he became very successful. But by David, when he said to Avshalom, he went and he died. When you have a dead person, you don't say because that's the pasuk that we say that Hashem is saying to Avram that you will come in peace, but it's by your death. But the word is Bishalom. Somebody leaves the basic nest and goes to the base medrash to learn. So you're going to be Makabel the Shekhinah when you go up to the higher level of learning. They never have menucha, not in this world or the next. Why? Again, it has to do with the Gemara that we saw before about the next world being potentially a place where there's a base matter. So they never have menucha. In other words, they're always learning, getting to higher and higher levels. I will save the rest for later.